The bell above the bakery door chimed once, sharp and bright, cutting through the low hum of the early morning oven. Mara Thompson looked up instinctively, her hands dusted white with flour, her mind already preparing for the familiar sight she had come to expect every single weekday morning. Mrs. Thelma Rivers would be there. She was always there. But instead of the pale blue cardigan and the soft shuffle of careful footsteps, three men stepped inside, dark suits, polished shoes, expressions too stiff for a place that smelled like sugar and yeast. Two of them carried leather briefcases. The third didn't carry anything at all except authority. His eyes swept the room like he was measuring it, calculating something invisible. Mara's stomach tightened before she even understood why. Behind them stood a fourth man, taller, younger. His coat was expensive in a way that didn't need logos to announce itself. His face was carefully neutral, but his jaw was clenched so tight it looked painful. When his eyes met Mara's, something flickered there. Hesitation, discomfort, maybe even guilt. The bakery felt suddenly too small, too quiet. "You're Mara Thompson?" one of the lawyers asked, his voice precise, clipped, completely out of place among the cinnamon rolls and glass display cases. Mara swallowed. "Yes, I am. Is something wrong?" The young man stepped forward before the lawyer could answer. He inhaled like he needed to brace himself. "My name is Julian Rivers," he said. His voice was controlled, but it wavered at the edges. "Thelma Rivers was my grandmother." The world didn't stop immediately. That came a second later. "She passed away last night." The words landed like a physical blow. Mara's hand slipped against the counter, and she had to grip the edge to stay upright. The room blurred, not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, like someone dimming a light she hadn't realized was holding everything together. No, no, she was supposed to come in today. She was supposed to complain about the cold and ask for tea with too much honey. She was supposed to sit by the window and tell Mara another half-finished story that wandered off halfway through, but somehow still felt important. Mara's chest hollowed out, as if something vital had been scooped from inside her. I'm sorry," she whispered, though the words felt painfully inadequate. Julian nodded once, his eyes dropping to the counter. "She talked about you, constantly, more than anyone else." One of the lawyers opened his briefcase. Papers shifted softly, like leaves brushing together. Another placed a sealed envelope gently on the counter, as if setting it down too hard might shatter something fragile. Mara recognized the handwriting immediately, shaky, uneven, familiar. Her name was written there. Thelma's name was written in the corner, smaller, like she hadn't wanted to take up too much space even in her final act. Julian cleared his throat. "My grandmother left you something. Actually," he hesitated, then corrected himself. "She left you a lot. She insisted we speak to you personally." Mara stared at the envelope, her vision swimming. "I don't understand," she said softly. I wasn't family." Julian's voice dropped, raw around the edges. "She said you were the only person who made her feel like she still mattered." The bakery door chimed again as a customer entered, but the sound felt distant, irrelevant, like it belonged to another world entirely. Mara couldn't breathe properly. Her heart pounded, grief and confusion twisting together until she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. She hadn't helped Thelma for this. She hadn't expected anything. She hadn't even thought about what would happen when Thelma was gone. And yet, here she was, standing behind a bakery counter at 6:47 in the morning, about to have her life irrevocably changed by a kindness she had never meant to be seen. Mara Thompson had learned early not to expect much from life. She was 32 years old, lived in a studio apartment so small she could touch the sink and the bed at the same time, and woke up every morning at 4:30 to start her shift at the bakery on Pine Street. The work was hard, long hours on her feet, burns on her arms from careless trays, paychecks that vanished almost as soon as they arrived, but it was steady, reliable, and reliability, Mara had learned, was a gift. She didn't dream big anymore. Dreaming had a way of making disappointment sharper. Her childhood had been shaped by quiet neglect rather than dramatic tragedy. Missed birthdays, promises that dissolved into excuses, the slow realization that she would always have to be her own safety net. By the time she was 16, she knew how to stretch groceries for a week and how to swallow loneliness without letting it show. Kindness for Mara had never been transactional. It was instinct, something she offered because she knew how much it hurt to go without it. The bakery had become her sanctuary, the smell of bread grounding her, the rhythm of routine giving her life shape. She knew the regulars by name, their usual orders memorized. She knew which mornings were rushed, which lingered softly. And then there was Mrs. Thelma Rivers. 83 years old, widowed, wrapped always in that pale blue cardigan no matter the weather. Her purse looked like it had lived several lifetimes, cracked leather, loose stitching, a clasp that never quite closed properly. Thelma had come in one morning and ordered tea. Just tea. She sat by the window, sunlight catching the fine silver threads of her hair, and stayed longer than necessary, staring out at the street like she was waiting for something, or someone, that never arrived. Over time, tea turned into conversation. Conversation turned into stories. She talked about her late husband, Harold, with a softness that never faded, about their house when it had been full of laughter, about a garden that no longer existed except in photographs and memory. She mentioned a son who lived far away, always busy, always promising to visit soon. She spoke of a grandson who had grown up faster than she could keep up with. "I don't blame them," Thelma would say quickly whenever the silence stretched too long. "Life gets loud." Mara never corrected her, never filled the silence with pity. She listened. She remembered details. She laughed at the right moments and sat quietly at the wrong ones. Slowly, Mara noticed the changes. The tremor in Thelma's hands, the way her stories looped back on themselves, how she sometimes forgot whether she'd paid already. Mara would gently tuck the change back into her purse, hold her cup steady, walk her home on cold days, pretending she needed fresh air too. None of it felt heroic, it felt human. But beneath Thelma's gentle smile was something heavier, loneliness worn thin by time. And beneath Mara's quiet kindness was a wound she rarely acknowledged, the fear of being invisible, of passing through the world without leaving warmth behind. They were two women at different ends of life, unknowingly stitching each other back together in small, fragile ways. The morning Thelma struggled to lift her teacup was the moment everything changed. Her fingers shook more than usual, the porcelain rattling softly against the saucer. Mara noticed instantly. She always did. "Here," Mara said gently, stepping closer. She wrapped her hand around Thelma's, steadying the cup without comment, without embarrassment. Thelma looked up at her then, eyes glassy with something deeper than gratitude. "You're very kind," she whispered, like it was a confession. Mara smiled, but something in her chest tightened. Everyone needs help sometimes. That was the morning Mara walked her home and noticed the flickering kitchen light, the dust on the counters, the untouched groceries, the quiet that felt too loud. That was the morning Mara made a decision she didn't announce to anyone, not even herself. From that day on, she visited every morning before work and every evening after. She cooked simple meals, cleaned gently, respectfully, never making Thelma feel incapable. She read aloud when the words blurred. She stayed when the nights felt long. One evening, while helping Thelma into her coat, Mara whispered, "As long as I'm here, you won't face the world alone." Thelma squeezed her hand, eyes shining. Neither of them knew how little time they had left. Have you ever met someone who quietly changed your life, without either of you realizing it at the time? And if you're already feeling this story, please consider subscribing. I spent a lot of time crafting every emotional beat of this journey for you, and your support truly means the world to me. Mara didn't realize how much space Thelma had begun to occupy in her life, until one evening she found herself rushing through her own dinner just to make it to the old woman's apartment before the sun fully disappeared. The walk there was only 6 blocks, but it felt longer at night. Streetlights flickered inconsistently, and the air carried the smell of damp concrete and distant traffic. Mara often replayed her day in her head during those walks, the early rush at the bakery, the impatient customers, the ache in her calves. But lately, her thoughts always ended in the same place. Did Thelma eat today? Did she remember to take her medication? Is she lonely right now? It surprised Mara how instinctive the concern had become. Inside Thelma's small apartment, time moved differently. The walls were lined with framed photographs that had faded unevenly, as if memory itself had selectively dimmed certain moments. A younger Thelma smiled beside a man with kind eyes and strong arms. A little boy, Julian, though Mara didn't yet know his name, sat on Harold's shoulders, laughing at something just out of frame. Sometimes Mara paused to look at those pictures when Thelma wasn't watching, trying to piece together the woman she had been before age and solitude thinned her voice. Thelma, for her part, noticed everything about Mara. "You're tired," she'd say, patting the couch beside her. "Sit. The world won't end if the dishes wait." Mara would smile and sit, surprised by how easily she obeyed. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the window, Thelma spoke in a quieter tone than usual. "I used to be needed," she said suddenly, staring at her hands. "By my husband, by my son, by my grandson." Mara felt something twist in her chest. "You still are." Thelma shook her head slowly. "Not the way I was, not the way that mattered." Those words stayed with Mara long after she left that night, because she understood them too well. Mara's own wounds weren't dramatic or visible. They were the kind that grew from being overlooked, from learning not to ask for help because it rarely came, from realizing that love, when it appeared, was often temporary. Her mother had been kind but distant, overwhelmed by her own disappointments. Her father had drifted out of their lives quietly, like someone leaving a room without saying goodbye. Mara had learned early that independence was survival, and that needing someone too much was dangerous. But with Thelma, something felt different. The kindness flowed both ways, subtle and steady. Thelma listened when Mara talked about the bakery, remembered the names of her coworkers, asked questions that made Mara feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. And slowly, without either of them nomming it, they began to fill roles neither had expected. Thelma became the grandmother Mara never had time for. Mara became the daughter Thelma no longer wanted to burden. The acts of kindness didn't arrive all at once. They accumulated quietly, like dust in corners no one thinks to check until it's already everywhere. Mara started bringing groceries twice a week when she noticed how often Thelma's fridge sat nearly empty. She learned which foods were easiest on her stomach, which soups reminded her of Harold, which bread she preferred toasted just enough to soften without burning. She fixed the flickering kitchen light using a borrowed ladder and a YouTube tutorial she watched 3 times beforehand. Thelma clapped when it finally stayed on. "You're very clever," she said proudly. Mara laughed. "I just Googled it." "That's clever now," Thelma insisted. On colder mornings, Mara arrived early with an extra scarf. On warmer days, she reminded Thelma to drink water, leaving little notes by the sink written in looping handwriting she tried to soften. Sometimes they read together, dusty romance novels with cracked spines and dramatic covers. Mara read aloud while Thelma closed her eyes, smiling at passages she'd already forgotten but still somehow remembered. At night, when the loneliness crept in hardest, Mara stayed longer than she should have. She listened to stories she'd already heard, knowing repetition wasn't carelessness, it was comfort. But kindness has a way of asking more over time. Mara began turning down extra shifts at the bakery. She started arriving home later, too tired to cook for herself. Her bank account shrank quietly, groceries and bus fares adding up. One afternoon, her manager frowned at her clock in time. "You've been distracted lately." Mara apologized quickly, heat rushing to her face. "It won't happen again." But it did. Because the truth was, Thelma was fatting. Her memory slipped more often. She sometimes forgot Mara's name, though she always recognized her face. Her steps grew slower, her breathing heavier. One evening, Thelma reached for Mara's hand suddenly. "Promise me something," she said. Mara's throat tightened. "What?" "Don't disappear." Mara squeezed her hand. "I won't." She meant it with everything she had. What Mara didn't see, what she couldn't see, was the world Thelma had once belonged to. The lawyers, the family discussions, the estate meetings that happened far away, filled with assumptions that care could be outsourced, that loneliness was inevitable. Julian Rivers hadn't visited in nearly a year. Not because he didn't care, but because caring reminded him of guilt he didn't know how to carry. His life was structured, efficient, demanding. His grandmother's decline felt like something he could manage later. He had no idea someone else already was. The tension didn't arrive as a confrontation. It arrived as exhaustion. Mara missed a rent payment by 3 days. Her landlord left a polite but firm note. She stood in her studio apartment staring at it, heart racing, wondering when her life had tilted so precariously. She told herself it was temporary, that she just needed to rebalance. But then Thelma fell. It wasn't dramatic. No ambulance. Just a quiet slip in the bathroom that left her shaken, bruised, and terrified. Mara sat with her on the cold tile floor, holding her while she cried, whispering reassurance she wasn't sure she fully believed. After that, Mara stayed overnight more often. Her own bed went untouched, her routine unraveled. One night, as Mara helped her into bed, Thelma looked at her with sudden clarity. "You shouldn't be doing all this." Mara smiled weakly. "I want to." Thelma shook her head. "It's costing you." That struck deeper than Mara expected. "I don't mind," Mara said, but her voice faltered. Thelma reached up, brushing flour-scarred fingers. "You remind me of who I used to be," she whispered. "The part of me that loved without keeping score." The words stayed with Mara long after she left that night, echoing uncomfortably. Because somewhere deep down, she was keeping score of time, of money, of energy slowly running out. And yet she couldn't stop. The final misunderstanding came quietly. Julian called one evening, his voice formal, distant. "My grandmother mentioned you." Mara froze. She did. "She seems very attached." The word stung. "I'm just helping," Mara said carefully. There was a pause. "I'll be coming by soon, we should talk." The call ended before Mara could respond. She sat on Thelma's couch afterward, staring at nothing, dread curling in her stomach. For the first time, she wondered if her kindness might be misunderstood, and whether loving someone could ever truly be harmless. Julian arrived on a Thursday afternoon, unannounced. Mara heard the knock while she was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup that Thelma had barely touched the night before. The sound was firm, measured, nothing like the hesitant taps of neighbors or the soft rhythm of delivery drivers. When Mara opened the door, she knew immediately who he was. He looked like the man from the photographs, only sharper now, more guarded. His coat was neatly pressed, his posture straight in a way that suggested control had been practiced for years. His eyes flicked past Mara, scanning the apartment before settling back on her. "You're Mara," he said, not a question. "Yes." Julian stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "My grandmother didn't answer her phone this morning." "She's resting," Mara replied, heat rising in her chest. "She didn't sleep well." Julian's jaw tightened. "And you decided that for her?" The words hit harder than he probably intended. "I'm here every day," Mara said quietly. "I know when she needs rest." "That's exactly the problem," Julian snapped. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "You've made yourself indispensable." Mara felt something inside her fracture. "I never asked for anything." Julian turned to face her fully now. "Do you know how many people take advantage of elderly women like my grandmother? Do you know how this looks?" The accusation hung heavy between them. Mara's voice trembled despite her effort to steady it. "I'm not taking advantage of her. I care about her." Julian scoffed softly. "Care doesn't pay rent. Care doesn't fix broken lives." The words found their mark because they were close enough to truth to hurt. Thelma stirred from the bedroom, her voice weak. "Julian." He rushed to her side immediately, all sharpness melting into concern. "Grandma, why didn't you tell me you fell?" "I didn't want to worry you," she said softly, then glanced at Mara. "She's been taking good care of me." Julian's eyes hardened again. That night Mara walked home alone for the first time in weeks. The city felt colder, louder. The kindness she'd given so freely now felt like something dangerous, something that could be taken, twisted, misunderstood. She cried in her apartment, not loudly, but quietly, like someone afraid of being heard. And for the first time since she'd made that promise, she wondered if she should step back. Mara didn't go back the next morning. She told herself it was just one day. That space might ease the tension, that Thelma had her grandson now. But guilt followed her like a shadow. At the bakery, she burned 2 trays of croissants. Her manager sighed. "You need to focus." Mara nodded numbly. That evening, she sat on her bed staring at her phone, waiting for it to ring. It didn't. Across town, Thelma waited too. The apartment felt emptier without Mara's presence. The silence pressed in on her chest, making it harder to breathe. She tried reading but couldn't concentrate, tried watching television but forgot the plot halfway through. Julian sat at the kitchen table reviewing paperwork, his brow furrowed. "You shouldn't be alone so much," he said absently. Thelma looked at him with quiet disappointment. "Then why am I?" The question landed heavily. That night Thelma fell again, harder this time. By the time Julian reached her, her breathing was shallow, her eyes unfocused. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and fear. Machines beeped softly, marking time with cruel precision. Julian sat beside her bed, holding her fragile hand, realization settling heavily on his shoulders. "You were right," Thelma whispered. "She loved me." Julian swallowed, guilt burning his throat. "I know." "I was afraid you scare her away," Thelma continued. "She's all I had." Julian's eyes filled with tears he hadn't allowed himself in years. He tried calling Mara that night. She didn't answer. Her phone sat untouched beside her, fear keeping her from picking it up. Days passed. Mara returned to her routine mechanically. Wake, work, sleep, repeat. The absence felt physical, like a missing limb. Then the call came. The hospital. Thelma had passed peacefully in her sleep. Mara collapsed onto the floor, grief stealing the air from her lungs. She never got to say goodbye. The funeral was small. Mara stood at the back, unsure if she even belonged there. Her black dress felt too thin for the weight she carried. She listened as Julian spoke, his voice steady but hollow. "She taught me what patience looked like," he said, "and what love feels like when you stop postponing it." Mara's tears fell silently. Afterward, Julian approached her. His eyes were red, his confidence stripped away. "I was wrong," he said simply, "and I'm sorry." Mara nodded, unable to speak. "My grandmother left instructions," Julian continued. "She wanted you there when we read the will." Mara looked up, startled. "I don't want anything," she whispered. Julian shook his head. "She did." As Mara walked away from the cemetery, she felt something shift. Not relief, not closure, but a quiet understanding. Kindness doesn't protect you from pain, but it changes what pain means. The law office smelled like polished wood and old paper, the kind of place where emotions were meant to be folded neatly away and replaced with signatures. Mara sat at the long conference table, her hands folded in her lap, trying to make herself as small as possible. She still didn't understand why she was there. Julian sat across from her, posture less rigid than before, his eyes carrying something heavier now: remorse, humility, and a quiet determination not to look away from it. The two lawyers flanked him, folders open, expressions neutral in the practiced way of people who witnessed other people's grief for a living. The older lawyer cleared his throat. Mrs. Thelma Rivers was very specific. He slid a document across the table. She requested that this portion be read aloud. Julian nodded once, his jaw tightening. "Please." The lawyer adjusted his glasses and began. "To my dear Mara, if you're hearing this, then I've finally gone where Harold been waiting very patiently for me. Don't be sad, I've had a full life, but I don't want you to think for one moment that what you gave me went unnoticed." Mara's chest tightened painfully. "You came into my life when I was shrinking, when the days were quiet in a way that hurt. You didn't rush me. You didn't pity me. You sat, you listened, and you stayed." Julian's eyes dropped to the table. "I know you never helped me for anything in return. That's exactly why I want you to have this." The lawyer paused, letting the silence settle. "She left you her apartment," he continued gently, "fully paid, along with a monthly stipend drawn from a separate account she set aside." Mara's breath caught. "I can't," she began, panic rising. "There must be a mistake." Julian looked up, eyes shining. "There is." The lawyer slid another envelope toward her. "There's more." Mara's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a handwritten note, smaller, shakier than the last. "You gave me dignity when the world forgot me. Let me give you security when the world has been unkind." Tears streamed freely now. Mara pressed her hand to her mouth, sobbing silently. Julian leaned forward. "She told me you were family. I didn't understand what that meant until it was too late." Moving into Thelma's apartment felt surreal. The space still smelled faintly of lavender and old books. Sunlight filtered through the same window where Thelma used to sit with her tea. For a moment, Mara simply stood there, overwhelmed by the echo of memory. She didn't change much at first. She couldn't. She slept in the guest room for weeks, afraid the bed might still be holding someone else's place in the world. She kept Thelma's cardigan folded carefully in the closet. The notes by the sink remained untouched. But slowly, healing arrived in small ways. Mara paid off her debts. She reduced her hours at the bakery, allowing herself to rest. She cooked meals without rushing, rediscovering flavors she'd forgotten how to enjoy. Julian checked in often, not out of obligation, but something closer to respect. One afternoon, he brought over a box of old photographs. "She wanted you to have these." They sat on the floor, sifting through moments frozen in time. "She used to say you reminded her of herself," Julian said quietly, "before life hardened her." Mara smiled softly. "She reminded me that kindness doesn't expire." Julian nodded. "I'm trying to learn that now." Together they visited the garden plot Thelma once talked about so fondly. It was overgrown, neglected, but still alive. They cleared weeds, planted new roses. The work was slow, honest, healing. Years later, the bakery on Pine Street had new windows and brighter paint. Mara still worked there, but not because she had to. She started a small foundation in Thelma's name, helping elderly neighbors with groceries, company, and care. No applications, no judgment, just presence. Every morning at 6:45 a.m., Mara unlocked the door and smiled at the sunlight spilling in. Sometimes she imagined the bell chiming, Thelma stepping inside in her pale blue cardigan, ready with a story she'd already told twice. And in a way, she was still there. Mara had learned that kindness doesn't always come back as we expect. Sometimes it returns as shelter, sometimes as purpose, sometimes as the quiet certainty that you mattered. She stood by the window one morning, watching people pass by, and whispered softly, "You're not alone." Not to anyone in particular, but to the world. What part of this story touched you the most?